Depths of Grace, The Life of John Newton. Chapter 3, Grace Rejected. John Newton lay in his hammock in the lower deck of the Harwich. It had been 2 weeks since he received the beating on deck for running away. His back was red and sore, and his mind was full of despair. The ship had set sail from Plymouth, from England, and from Polly Catlett, the girl he loved. He was trapped on board, and the thought of not seeing her again for 5 years made John's heart sink. Even worse, no one on board wanted anything to do with him. Now that he was just a common sailor, the other sailors whispered and laughed about him, remembering his proud attitude when he was an officer. Day after day passed, and John's situation went from bad to worse. One moment he was filled with anger for everyone. He even imagined murdering the captain. At another moment, John even thought of ending his own life by throwing himself overboard. Still, something kept him from taking action either way. One morning, after 3 weeks of sailing, John awoke to the sound of supplies being loaded in the hold below him. The Harwich had reached the Canary Islands, off the African coast, and was getting fresh food. Although he had heard the wake-up whistle earlier, John remained in his hammock. Sleep seemed to be the only place he could escape his surroundings. "Up on deck, Newton," an officer climbing down the ladder shouted. John muttered something under his breath. "What's that, Newton? Don't be blaming me for where you are. Now get up." The officer followed the remark with a swift kick to the bottom of the hammock. John snarled, "I'll get up when I'm ready to get up. You can tell the cat." His words were cut short as with a sudden jolt, the officer had cut the rope at one end of Newton's hammock, causing him to tumble onto the floor. "There now, get up on deck, I said," shouted the officer. Newton scrambled up from the floor and thought about carrying out his plans to murder the officer rather than the captain. But all he could say was, "All right, I'm up." When John finally emerged onto the deck, he noticed some unusual activity. Another sailor was loading his belongings into a longboat. "Where is he going?" John asked a sailor. "He's being traded for a sailor on a merchant ship. I hear they're looking for one more to trade." A thought quickly went through John's mind. Any place would be better than here. John hurried over to the nearby lieutenant. "Beg your pardon, sir," he began, acting as respectful as possible. "I'd like to volunteer to be the other man traded to this ship." The officer sneered back. "I hardly think anybody wanted you, Newton. We'd probably have to pay them to take you. Still, it would be nice to be rid of you. Wait here." John watched as the lieutenant talked to Captain Carter and the captain of the merchant ship. Finally, he returned to John. "All right, Newton, pack your bag. You've just been dismissed from His Majesty's service." In a half an hour, John had packed his bag, climbed aboard the Pegasus, a merchant ship captained by a man named Penrose. The captain greeted John. "I hear your last name is Newton. You wouldn't be a relative of Captain John Newton of Wappington, would you?" "Yes, he's my father," John replied. "Well, then," the captain continued, "I welcome you on board as the son of a dear friend. I'll be honored to have you join us. My first mate, Mr. Blunt, will show you to your quarters." John followed Mr. Blunt, but as they descended below deck, the first mate paused. "Mr. Newton, I want to make you aware that I do not share Captain Penrose's enthusiasm for having you aboard. Any man that is unfit for the Royal Navy is unfit for this ship. But I hope you will prove me wrong." John Newton did not prove Mr. Blunt wrong. In the weeks that followed, John became well known aboard the Pegasus for his laziness. He also used every opportunity to talk rudely and behave the same way to impress the fellow sailors. His actions certainly did not impress Captain Penrose, but the captain put up with John's attitude, even after John made up a song for the crew to sing that made fun of the captain. All that changed later in the year. Captain Penrose suddenly became sick and died. A new captain was named, Mr. Blunt. John knew that as soon as he would be able, Captain Blunt would trade John off to a Navy ship as a common sailor. John had to get off the ship quickly. There was a man traveling aboard the Pegasus by the name of Amos Clow. John had heard Clow tell stories about the factory he operated in Africa. This factory was not a place where things were made, but instead a terrible place where African slaves were kept until they could be shipped overseas. What really got John's attention was Mr. Clow's story about the money he made. Maybe he could do something to make some money and get back to England and marry Polly. Clow agreed to take John on as a business partner, and Captain Blunt would gladly agree to let John go. John was glad to leave the ship. He left so fast he didn't even ask for his pay. I'll have plenty of money someday, he thought. It didn't take long for John's dreams to disappear. Before he could even start working for Clow, he got very sick. Instead, he had to stay with Clow's home while Clow traveled upriver. My woman Pye will take care of you, Clow said. John soon found out that Pye had no interest in taking care of him. Instead, she treated him like one of her servants, giving him only a little water and few leftovers for his meals. His condition quickly got worse. One day, he was so weak with fever that after begging for some food, he dropped his small plate in front of Pye. Is this how you respond to my kindness? She cried out. Then you shall have no food at all. That night, John was so hungry. He climbed out of the window of his room into the moonlit yard. His stomach twisted in pain as he desperately searched for anything to eat. There, he spies a cassava plant growing nearby. The roots are often boiled up for food. John clawed them out of the ground with his fingers and tried to eat them raw. The uncooked roots, though, caused John to throw up. No doubt John would have died from illness and starvation if it were not for the kindness of others. Pye's other servants tried to sneak food into John so he could get better. They also secretly carried letters John wrote in desperation to his father asking for help. When Clow finally returned, John complained to him about how he was treated, but Clow wouldn't listen, especially with Pye standing nearby. John was glad when they finally had the time for the next business trip and he was well enough to go. He went with Clow, but after a trader falsely accused John of stealing, Clow began treating John like a prisoner. They chained him on board a small riverboat. His only food and water came from the fish he caught and the daily rain showers. John continued to be treated badly by Clow and Pye to the point that he began to lose his mind. But just when he was losing hope of forever being free, they decided to trade John to another factory owner in the area. This man fed and clothed him and paid him for his work. Soon John was not only healthy again, but he was even given ownership of part of the factory. John quickly forgot his days as a servant and how it felt to be treated like one. Now that he had some money and power, he decided to live life exactly the way he wanted to, eating and drinking and using his position to treat others badly. He even began to learn about false gods and began to take part in their strange, ungodly rituals. It seemed that John could go no farther away from God. Little did he know, there was a plan to rescue him. Back in England, John's father had not forgotten about his son. He had received the letters John had sent. Despite all that John's failures, his father still pitied him. He learned of a ship named the Greyhound that was heading for the African coast. Captain Stanwick was ordered to try and find John and rescue him if possible. One warm February day, John was resting on the front porch of his home when he heard men approaching. It was one of his business partners accompanied by 3 others. "There he is, that's John Newton," said the partner, pointing at John. John sat up expecting to make a business deal. "John Newton," said Captain Stanwick, "I've been looking for you." "For me? What for?" He wondered if he owed this man some money. "Your father sent me to rescue you and bring you home to England aboard my ship." John paused for a moment and then remembered the letters he'd sent. But now, as he looked around his home and thought of the money he was making, he laughed. "Rescue? I think you can see I don't need any rescuing. Tell my father I don't need him." With that, John stood up and rather rudely began to make his way inside. "Hold on a minute, Newton. Don't you realize how fortunate you are? I was about to sail by this piece of land when I saw your friend here signaling for trading." John laughed again. "Well, then, I guess you're the lucky one. Go ahead and trade. I'm going inside." Captain Stanwick wasn't about to give up. "Before you go, Newton, there's something you ought to know. Your father wanted me to tell you that you have come into a sizable inheritance. It seems that an aunt of yours passed away and left all her fortune to you." "What's that you said?" said John, turning about. "You've inherited a fortune. I've been instructed to bring you home. You'd be my personal guest aboard the Greyhound." Within an hour, John had packed all of his belongings and left his African home. It was too good to be true. He was to be a wealthy beyond his dreams, even wealthy enough to marry Polly Catlin. In reality, it was too good to be true. Captain Stanwick had made up a lie, and it had worked. John was now a passenger aboard the Greyhound. It didn't take long for Captain Stanwick to wonder why he had gone to all the trouble to rescue John. As a passenger, he had no responsibilities on board. Instead, he passed the time drinking and talking rudely with the others. As John told stories about his past adventures to the crew, Captain Stanwick's opinion of John worsened. "I'm no saint myself, Mr. Newton, but if there was ever a bad luck Jonah, it's you." He said it half joking one day when they dined. "I'm afraid no good will come of us taking such a rebel as you aboard the Greyhound." John thought little of Captain Stanwick's words. After finishing their trading along the African coast, the Greyhound made a long journey toward England by making a big circle following the trade winds out at the Atlantic. To pass the boredom of the long trip, John turned from drinking to reading. One night he was reading a book that talked about living a life completely devoted to God and the peace and joy it brought. The more John read, the more he was reminded of his own life and his attempts to find satisfaction in what the world had to offer. In the stillness of his cabin, he mused, "What if these things are true?" He quickly pushed the thought away and closed the book and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, John suddenly awoke to thunderous sound of waves and a cry from on deck. "The ship is sinking!" The Greyhound was being trapped by a huge storm in the North Atlantic. As water began to pour into his cabin, John jumped to his feet and began to climb the ladder. "Newton," Captain shouted, "get my knife from the cabin." John turned back from the ladder and let another crew member pass. Then in horror, he watched as a man emerged on deck and was instantly swept overboard and to his death. Except for the captain's command, Newton would have been the one to be caught by the wave. God's grace again has been shown to him. John's narrow escape seemed only temporary, as the whole ship was battered by wave after wave. One section of the bow was destroyed and water flooded in. The crew and John pumped and bailed hour after hour as more water flooded in. As the captain looked at their hopeless situation, he turned to John. Did I not say you were a bad luck, Jonah? We'll no doubt all die unless we throw you overboard. Still, the crew continued to battle the storm into the morning. Although the winds had let up, there seemed to be little doubt that the ship would sink. Grab any wood you can and patch that hole, cried the captain to the crew. Then he turned to John. It's our only hope. John could only answer, if it won't do, then may the Lord have mercy on us. John finally called out to God for help. But would God listen? Would God answer John's cry? Jeremiah 33:3 says, call on me, and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things that you do not know.